Today is February 2nd, 2016, and Joe Turner and wife Jenny and myself, Judy Meyer, are talking to Mary Schuette. Did I pronounce that right? How do you spell that?
Schuette.
Is it German descent?
That's what they tell me. His father came from Edwardsville, Illinois to Bridgeton because his brother had come over here and they got a big piece of ground together. Then Bill's dad kept his and the brother sold his to what is now Bridgeton Terrace.
I see.
Bridgeton Terrace.
I see.
Yeah. And our farm was, and our home, that when they gave us the ground, was down in the corner of his dad's farm right next to Bridgeton Terrace.
So you didn't start off in Bridgeton, though?
Yes, it was Bridgeton.
But you were born here in
No, I was born in St. Louis County.
in St. Louis
Well,
County?
yeah, it was St. Louis area. I should say, Mom and Dad lived on Forest Avenue in Overland.
Oh, okay. That's
That's where I was born.
Uh-huh.
And then I was raised in St. John's. My dad bought a home on Roy Avenue in St. John's, and we lived there. I went to school at Home Heights School and on to Rittner High School, and I can tell you a story about that. Because when I graduated, the day we were practicing for graduation for high school, they came over the public address system and said, "Mary Helen Schumann, you're wanted at Superintendent Hake's office." And I thought, what have I done? And everybody kept saying, "What'd you do, kid? What'd you do, kid?" I don't know. I went up there and I got up there. And his secretary was Edith McAllister. And she said, "Mary, you're going to be so happy when you see who he's got in his office for you to meet." And I thought, who could that be? And I walk in, and it's Mabel McAllister, who was the principal of the Home Heights School all the 8 years that I went to the grade school there. And the first thing Arthur Hake said to me is, "Mary, you know Mabel." And I said, "Mabel McAllister." And she said, "Mary, I'm so glad you showed up today because I want you to be my secretary starting next year."
Oh, they were offering you a job right after high school?
Well, I hadn't even graduated yet. I was practicing for graduation the day they called me up there. And I said, "Oh my goodness." And Mabel said, "Well, the girl that's been my secretary now is having to move." And she told me, I told her that if I could find Mary Helen Schumann to be my secretary, I'd be happy. And she said, "Well, I know Mary Helen. Just ask her. Maybe she'll take the job." And I hadn't even thought about a job. My girlfriends had all found jobs at the banks and every place, and I hadn't even thought about it yet. Truthfully, I wanted to go to college, and my dad couldn't make up his mind whether he could spend the money for it or not. So I wound up taking the job with Mabel McAllister. Well, I worked in the Superintendent Hake's office that summer, and then when September, when school started, I showed up at the school. Well, she walked in, she said, "Mary, before we go any further, I'm going to tell you about the lesson you taught me when you was in the 3rd grade at school here." And I thought, what in the world's going on? She said, "Do you remember the day you came down to the office and told me I better go up there and straighten that teacher out in that room?" And I said, "Yes, I remember it very well." And I said, "Do you remember why I did it?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, I had a girlfriend, Barbara, in fact, she was a cousin, Barbara Jane Hutchings, and she had a speech defect. And we were in the classroom, and she raised her hand to answer a question, and 4 or 5 other kids had raised their hand, but the teacher called on her for the answer. So Barbara Jane stood up and gave her the answer. And the teacher looked at her and said, "Sit down and shut your mouth and don't ever speak in my class again. I can't understand a word you're saying." And I got up out of my chair, went to the door, and went straight down to the principal's office.
Wow.
And I said, "Mabel McAllister, go up there and straighten that teacher out that don't know how to be nice to people."
Wow.
And she did. Well, she came back and she said to me, "That was the lesson you taught me, Mary. In all the years and all the education I had to get myself to my position, I never had a class where they said, learn how to respect handicapped people."
That is
so
really
she started a class of that of her own with her teachers. Every Monday when she had a teachers meeting, they had a lesson on respecting, and she said that was all because of you.
Oh, wow. That is really something.
So many years later. So I
Yes.
worked for her for 2 years, because my father decided that he had 5 of us kids and I was the oldest, and he didn't know if he could send me to college. So he didn't want to start me out. If I wanted to go that bad, I should work for a year and save my money, and then I could go. In the meantime, I met Bill Schuette and wound up getting married and never did get to college.
Now, how did you meet Bill Schuette?
Well, my father, that's another long story. You're going to have me all afternoon to keep this up. My dad was a concrete contractor, and he ordered all of his concrete from the Volts Material Company. They were on Page Avenue over in Overland area. And Volts Material Company came to Dad and wanted to sell him tickets for a dance at Westlake Park for all the fellows that worked for him. So Dad bought a whole slew of tickets for all the fellows that worked for him and their wives and girlfriends and whatever. And so anyway, he's giving them out to the guys Friday night when they come in the house to get paid. And my Uncle Bud Schumann worked for my dad, and he looked at me and he said, "Mary, have you got a date for Saturday night?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, why don't you come out to that dance with me? I've got a girlfriend, and we'll go out to the dance, and you can meet the whole gang of." Well, I knew all the fellows that worked for Dad and everybody, so I went. And I got out there, and there was a big table. It was all the men that worked for Dad and their wives and their friends and whatnot. And anyway, they started to dance at Westlake Park, if you had any idea where that was at. And everybody got up to dance, and me at the one end of the table, I didn't have a partner. And Bill was at the other end of the table, and he didn't have a partner. He'd come with his brother-in-law, which was eventually my brother-in-law. But anyhow, he asked me to dance, and I danced with him a couple times, and he wanted to know if he could take me home, and I said yes. And then in the next minute or so, here come another fella that worked for my dad that I had my cap set for, and I was going to get him or else. Anyway, he come and danced with me, and he wanted to take me home, and I let him take me home. And I said to my mother, "I met an awful nice guy last night, and I told him to bring me home, and then I wound up coming home with the other guy. I guess I'll never see that other fella." And this was on one weekend, and the next weekend, on a Friday afternoon, I had to go to the eye doctor down on Grand and Owl in St. Louis on the streetcar. So I went down there, and I was in the doctor's office, and the nurse came in, and she said, "Mary, before you start for home, your mother wants you to call her. You got to call her before you leave down here." So when I was done in his office, I went downstairs to the drugstore, and I went to the payphone, and I called Mom. She said, "You know that fellow that wanted to bring you home and you didn't let him last week? He wants to take you out tonight." And I told him he was at the doctor's office, and I didn't know if you'd be home in time. And so he left a number for you to call him and let him know if you'd be home in time to go out with him at 7:30, 8 o'clock. So I called the number. It's Ohm's White House in St. Charles, tavern on the street, as big as it could be. And when I called AM and said, "Ohm's Hideout," I said, "All right, I was supposed to talk to a Bill Schuette." "Well, Bill's here waiting for that call from you." So I talked to Bill. He said he wanted to take me out, and he'd like to pick me up about 7:30. And I said, "Well, I'm at Grand and Olive, and if I can get home by 7 o'clock, I'll be ready by 7:30.
Well, what time was this appointment that you were?
I was in the afternoon sometime. When I got done talking to him, I called my mom, and I said, "Meet me at St. Charles Rock Road," because I had to walk a mile after I got off the streetcar track. And she said, "I will." I said, "If you do, then I'll be there in time for Bill to get me at 7:30. Bill came and took me out that night, and I never went with anybody else after that.
No.
We went together 3 years, and I married him, and we stayed married for 43 years when he died.
Oh, well, that's a really, really beautiful story. Let me ask you something. Would you mind telling us when you were born?
1929, November the 16th.
And when did you graduate? What was the year that you graduated?
From high school. Now let me think about that a minute. 47.
You were
1947.
You graduated from Rittner High School in
Rittner.
1947. Do you remember the size of your graduating class?
365 people in it.
That's interesting is I think that so many of us, I know I can come up with the number, and I think many people can. I don't know why, it's just a number.
Well,
Let me ask you another question. Can you remember your telephone number that you had before you were married?
oh, no, I can't.
Oh, but what about your phone number then after you got married?
Oh, golly. We didn't have a phone for a
Oh,
long time.
really? That's
Oh, yeah.
interesting too.
Oh, yes, because, well, let's see, let me think about this. I guess we were married about 2 years when I got pregnant, and I was having trouble. And Bill had to walk from our house there by Bridgeton Terrace, and I guess it was about 4 good blocks down to the corner of Cypress and Natural Bridge Road. And I'm trying to think of the name of the lady that owned the little store, and I can't think of it. But anyway, he walked down there and used her phone in the store to call my mom and dad and tell them I was having trouble.
Oh my.
And so they came out from St. John's where they lived, and they came out, and then my mother said, I think we better call the doctor and get you to the hospital. And I got to the hospital and I lost my twin girls.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
But that's another story.
Well, so you were 20, 21 when you got married?
21 when I got married.
And how old was Bill?
I guess 27.
So he was about 6 years older than you?
Yeah, and he'd gone through the war in the South Pacific, and I didn't know him at the time. He was in the 854th Aviation Engineers, and he was in 4 invasions.
Wow.
When his outfit went in on Guam, it was nothing but solid jungle.
Ooh.
And in 48 hours, they cleared enough jungle and poured enough concrete that the next day they landed an airplane on Guam.
Was he in the Navy?
No, he was in the Army. He joined the Army. He was drafted in the Army as a pilot. But when they found out he knew construction, because he'd worked in that, they put him in the engineers.
I see.
And they only lost 3 men out of their outfit and through all the wars. But and we had 30 Army reunions, and I made every one of them.
Really?
Bill died before the last 2 or 3, but we made them all. Well, I shouldn't say that. They got a hold of us on the 3rd one. And that's because the man that started was in Washington, D.C. in the Pentagon, and he got a hold of a few of the Army buddies and from the East Coast, and they had one in New York, and then they had one there in Washington, D.C., and then that's when a man had joined the group, they found him, and he was from St. Louis. And he planned that reunion at the Red Carpet Inn on Lambert.
Oh, yeah.
Right there by the airport,
Right.
6 blocks from where we lived. And he called at midnight and wanted to know if that was the bill shooting.
At midnight?
Yes. The telephone rang at midnight, and I answered the phone, and the man wanted to know if it was the home of William A. Schuette that was in the 854th. And I said, I don't know what the number of his outfit was. And I woke Bill up and I said, you're one on the phone. And Bill talked to him. And he told Bill that they were bringing the 3rd reunion here, and he was the right Bill that belonged in the outfit and all. And Bill said, he got off the phone, he said to me, he's going to send me all the literature about it, Mary, but we're not going to make that reunion. I said, you're not going to make that reunion. I said to him, if there's a reunion, I'm going to be there, and if you don't want to come, you stay home. I'll even walk. It's only 6 blocks up there. Well, for 6 months, he swore him down he wasn't going to make that reunion. And I kept saying, well, you're going to be sorry. I said, you went with me to my high school reunions and enjoyed them. And these guys was your high school. You lived with them for 4 years in the South Pacific. You ought to be thrilled to death to go. Well, I knew that one of his Army buddies, he had gone to Chicago to his wedding about 6 months after I started dating Bill. And he came back from there and he brought that buddy and his wife down, and they stayed at his brother Joe's house for a week, and we entertained him in St. Louis. That was their honeymoon. And they didn't even have a car. They went back on a bus. And he wasn't going to that reunion. So anyway, finally one day he said, oh, I guess if you really want to go, we can go. So I figured we'd go. Well, there was 185 fellows and their families that showed up for that reunion. And I was so surprised that I got Bill to come to that. But anyway, when they got ready to have their big meeting, the men did, I took the women and we went to Northwest Plaza, which was brand new at that time.
Brand new.
And they had to get their cars out. The women got the cars, and we drove to Northwest Plaza and all parked together at the parking lot. We stayed about 2 hours and we came back to the hotel. When we came back to the hotel, my Bill come walking out the door with 2 of his Army buddies, and they were smiles on their faces. I told them I've never seen Bill smile that before and since, but he really, anyway, he said, we're going to Denver next year. That's what he said.
He was
Well,
already on
oh,
board.
yeah. And that's fine, except he was gonna buy a four-wheel drive Jeep and drive to Denver. And I said, you can go by yourself. I'm gonna fly, because I'm not gonna drive across the godforsaken state of Kansas. I said, no, I will not. I've driven enough to know, and I'm not gonna do it. Well, he wasn't gonna go then. Okay, you stay home, I'll get the airplane and I'll go. Well, I come home from work, and he was there at noontime, and he said, oh, you really wanna fly? I guess we'll fly. I went to the airport that afternoon and bought my ticket before I went back to work, so that he wouldn't change his mind. And we went to Denver, and we never missed a reunion after that. I missed one after he was dead and gone. I moved to Florida, and I didn't want to spend the money to go to the reunion. But my son Alan, at the 10th reunion, he had bought, he worked for Dr. Glossman, who was a dentist here in Bridgeton, and he bought the doc's old Lincoln automobile, and he wanted to take us to Washington D.C. in that car. And so Bill said, sure. So that's where we went. Well, anyway, Alan went to that reunion with us, and he never missed any of them afterwards. He even planned his honeymoon when he got married, that they would be going into Vegas, and we were going to Reno. And so he went on his way, and we went to Reno. We got to Reno, and we was the gang down in one of the casinos, and they come in over the loud and says, Bill Schuette, your son's hunting for you up here at the office. So we go to find out what's going on. Well, Alan went to Vegas, and they took a car and was going to ride around in the outskirts, and they come up on a herd of sheep, and Alan drove into the herd of sheep.
A herd of sheep?
Well, it was down there where they, as he said, they found out later that the guy that was herding the sheep had parked his car on the side of the road and hid the sign that said it was territory for them to go. And they didn't know there was sheep down the road, and when he went around the corner, here was a herd of sheep, and well, anyway, the man came over and said, don't worry about it, they'll come out from your car, just even sit there a minute, they'll all come out. Well, two of them did, they got killed.
Oh my.
So anyway, he had to take the rent-a-car back into Vegas, and they wanted to rent him another car, and he said, no, I'm just gonna go to Reno, and we'll meet my mom and dad, and it's my dad's honor reunion. So they came to Reno, and then his wife went upstairs and got to know how to take care of the books. And after that, they came to every reunion, and she took care of all the bookwork for Bethel while we had our reunions.
Well,
They made the one, and when I didn't make the one, they went.
Oh,
And he called me and he said, you'll get a newsletter in a day or so, Mom, and you'll find out what job I got. And I thought, what did he get involved in? Well, he'd been helping the chaplain out whenever they had their service on Sunday morning before they parted to leave. And I figured maybe that old chaplain was getting old, and so Alan took over that job. No, he turned out being president. And I said, how did you get that job? He said, well, you know, Dad would never go to any of their meetings. He'd go to the meetings, but he wanted no part of being an officer. So last time they voted him in as a director in place of his dad. And so when they got the next meeting, that's the one where they voted him in as president. He was president for 2 years in it. And we never missed a reunion. In fact, the last reunion Bill made, we went to Niagara Falls in New York, and I took 12 tanks of oxygen with me for him, and Alan came home, while Alan was with us, he carried his dad up and down every set of steps we ever came to, and everything.
Was your son, this son, Alan, in the military?
No, my boys were all too young for it. My oldest two boys had to sign up for it when they were 18, and they waited for their numbers to be called, and then neither one of them got called. Now the second sons, I'll never forget that night. That was one night when Bill Schuette got kind of mad and tempered. Dale said, they're drawing numbers tomorrow, Dad, and if they draw my number, I'm going to Canada and I'll never be back.
Oh my.
And Bill said, what for? I never am going to go in the Army. And he figured he'd go to Canada. Well, Bill hit the roof like, woo, you don't give, you know, your dad did it, you could do it. And so anyway, I remember they had quite a round over that.
Was this during the Vietnam War era?
Yeah, well, the first one, yeah, I guess Vietnam was the first, wasn't it? Korea. And in fact, we didn't know where the countries were at, you know.
Korea would have been first, and
Yeah,
then
that's the one
Vietnam.
it was for them, I guess.
Uh-huh.
See, my boys are 55 and, well, 50, 59 and 62, and then Alan he's later. He's not quite that old.
So you had 3 sons.
Mhm.
Let me back you up just a little bit.
Yeah.
You said you graduated from Rittner High School,
In 1947.
and that they offered you a job just right then
Oh,
and there.
yeah, I got it, I was secretary of that, and I could have had that job. And, well, the boss who knew me, as I told you, she said I taught her a lesson, which I didn't remember doing, but anyway, she said, oh, Mary, anytime she needed a substitute teacher in a classroom, I got sent in the classroom.
And you served as a substitute teacher too.
Yeah.
Did you continue doing this work after you got
No.
married? Why not,
No.
may I ask?
They didn't ask me to, and I didn't want to, I guess you could say. Well, for one thing, my husband had said that if we had children, he didn't want me to work away from home. Not until the oldest one was out of high school. So Alan was a junior in high school when I finally went and found a job. And that was with the Telcher family.
You worked for Mrs. Telcher?
Oh, yes.
What?
See, my Bill went to grade school with them.
Pardon?
My Bill went to grade school with Kathleen and Julius Telcher.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, the McNulty family was Telcher, her name.
Uh-huh.
And so anyway, oh yeah, when we had our children, we used to meet at Blanchette Park and have picnics and whatnot with the Telchers.
Oh.
I worked for Julius and Kathleen, yeah.
What did you do for them?
Worked in the hardware store. They owned a you know, that was another thing, the hardware store. I can't think of the name of the couple that was gonna have the hardware store in Bridgeton. They had it all lined up with witty hardware downtown and everything. And he backed out on it. And Kathleen was running the post office at that time in Bridgeton. And when she found out about that, she said to Julius, I'm gonna take that post office job. I'm gonna get that job away from the post office. And Julius said, well, you know, I'm a farmer. I won't have time to help you with that hardware store. And she said, I'm not gonna need you. And she took over the hardware store. And so anyway,
What location was this when you were working for them? Because I know she did move a couple of times. She started off.
way down there on the corner, almost at the airport.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Well, see, I lived just up that Cypress Road.
Right.
It was about 4 or 5 blocks.
So did you work at that
No,
location?
I didn't go to work for her until my son was 17 years old. And I went down to the store one day, and her and Dorothy and Helen, her sisters, were all up there at the checkout, and they were laughing and having a good time. And I just jokingly said, you know what, when I need a job one of these days, I'm gonna come down here and work with you gals. You always are having so much fun. That night I got home and I get a phone call from Kathleen.
Really?
Mary, is there any chance that you'd come to work for me?
Oh, my
I could
goodness.
use you 2 days a week. And I said, well, my husband told me I couldn't work till my kids were out of high school, and Ellen is still a junior in high school, so I don't know. I'll check out and see. I'd like to try it. And so Bill said, well, I said, well, he's a junior in high school, and he's got a part-time job for the summer, and then he'll be a senior, and he'll be in school all day long, so I don't have to be watching him like he's a little juvenile kid or something. And so Bill said, well, you go ahead and work for him. Well, I worked 2 days for 2 weeks, and then it was, I need 3 days, Mary. I need 4 days, Mary. It wound up, I was working a 40-hour week for her.
Really?
Not quite a full 40 hours, I guess. I didn't work on Mondays, and I didn't go to work until noon on Friday.
Wow, that sounds pretty nice. Now what did your job consist of?
Anything you could do in a hardware store. Honey, I've done anything from unloading trucks to, I don't know what all, nails or what. And inventory was a wonderful time.
Why is
When you
that?
had to start counting everything in the store. You know, you get up a bin of nails and you're supposed to tell them how many hundred nails was in that, in an inventory. Believe me, it wasn't all fun, but it
No.
was fun. Kathleen was so, I learned so much from her. She was the most intelligent woman I ever knew in my life.
Yes, yes, we had the privilege of interviewing her, and we had a wonderful time
Oh, yeah.
doing that. We're so glad that we were able to
Oh, I
do
am
that.
too. That would be marvelous.
So how long did you work?
17 years I worked for her.
Wow. Did you stop? At what point? When did you stop working?
Well,
And I said, what was the reason?
I'm trying to remember.
Or just what was maybe the reason that you?
I don't know, because my Bill was, well, he couldn't work away from home for years. And I worked for her because I'd go home at noon. She had said I could have a half hour for lunch. And when that happened, I said to her, I've got to have an hour because I had to go home and fix Bill's lunch. We only lived 3 blocks from him at that time, at the hardware store. Because we bought a home in the subdivision there next to where their hardware store was at. Carrollton subdivision.
Oh, okay. What street was it? Do you remember?
On Bonfils. I lived on the main drag of it.
Sure. And you drove a car then at that time?
Oh, honey, I've been driving a car since I was 16 years old. That's another story. You don't want to hear it.
Well, many women.
My father taught me to drive, and we lived on Engler Avenue in St. John's, and it was a dead-end street, and you went down and made a round circle and came back up. Well, I couldn't get up that hill without killing my engine. It was still in 1939, I was driving that, and you still had to shift your cars. And going up that hill, I'd kill that motor every time. And I think that time I'd done it about 3 times, and I hollered, I quit! My dad reached over, grabbed me by the back of the neck, and he said, no woman is going to be in my family that can't drive a car. So get yourself up that hill. And I did, and I never did kill the engine after that.
But that is good, because I know even when I was in school that many of my friends' mothers did not drive.
Oh, well.
So it was good that.
No, I've driven everywhere. I've driven in every state in the Union but Montana. And I still love to drive. In fact, when I left here, after Bill died, that's another story in my life. A cousin of mine lived across the street from Bill and I up on Gist Road, and we played pinochle with him a lot of times. And her husband said, one of these days I'm going to take a paddle boat to the top of the Mississippi and go to Mississippi to New Orleans.
Wow, that's
and I
an
said,
adventure.
Jim, if you ever do that, tell me about it. Would you let me know? I'd like to do that too. Well, 3 years after my husband died, he called me and said, my wife and I are going to make that trip, Mary, and her sister wants to go, and she needs a partner. Would you like to go along as her partner? So I did. And we flew up to Red Wing, Minnesota somewhere, and caught the boat up there and came all the way down the Mississippi on the paddle, Mississippi Queen. And the first night on the boat, the sister wanted to go to bed at 9 o'clock. And I went to bed with her, and I thought, this is dumb. I could be out there watching them dance on the dance floor. So the next night when she wanted to go to bed at 9 o'clock, I said, Barbara Jane, you go ahead and go to bed. I'll be down later. I said, I'm going to go up and sit on the edge of the dance floor and just watch them dance and listen to the good music. And I got up there and I sat down in front of the bandstand and kind of off to one side there, and oh, that music was so good. And that piano player, he was just fabulous with that piano. So I got up and I reached up and I tapped him on the shoulders and I said, is your fingers getting hot? And he looked at me kind of funny and I said, I've been staring at him so hard I thought maybe they was getting hot. And he laughed and he said, no. And I said, well, your talent is outstanding. Which I found out later he had a doctorate in piano performance. But anyhow, he thanked me and I went back, and so the intermission came and the band went out the back door off the stage and he jumped off the front and come down and wanted to take me to the bar for a drink. So I went to the bar with him and had a drink, and on the way back for him to start to play again, he told me that he just had his 50th birthday.
Just had his 50th birthday.
Yeah. And I had just come from my 50th high school class reunion. So I knew I was at least 18 years older than him. And I knew that, and it was 2 years before he found out I was old as I was. But
And
anyway,
during that 2 years, what happened? Were you in
well,
correspondence?
he stayed on the boat, but he wrote to me and he called me every time they stopped. Now, when they went up and down the Mississippi anywhere near St. Louis, he called me that they were going to be there that night, and I'd drive up get on the boat and spend a bit of time with him. And finally he said to me, why don't you make a trip to Florida while I'm down there? He was on the boat 6 weeks and off 4, and on 6 and off 4. So one of the times when he was going to Florida, and his mom and dad lived in Florida, he was born and raised in Florida. And so one of the times that he was going to be home, I drove to Florida.
By yourself?
All by myself.
Wow.
I told my family I knew where I was going. I was going to Winter Haven, Florida, and that was it. And I flew down there, and I drove down there, and I met his family, and I came back home, and a couple times later I did it. I think I did it 6 times in 2 years, and finally I decided I might as well live in Florida. So I moved to Florida.
How old were you when you moved to Florida?
Oh my God, don't ask me, I can't remember. I have to put it all back together. Let's see. I was 57. I guess I was in my 60s. But anyway, when I drove down there and I went down one time and stayed for a month. And that's when I decided I was going to move down there. And I came back, and then I got the places, 3 apartment complexes in Winter Haven, and I got their addresses, and I called them and asked them to send me information about their apartments, and 2 of them never did send me any, and the other one did, and that's the one I went up there, First Christian Towers it was called, and I rented an apartment in it. I moved up there. I bought a U-Haul trailer. I rented a U-Haul trailer in Hallwood. I took with me down there. My sister went with me on that trip. And I flew her back, I paid for her train, come back on the plane, and I stayed in Florida. Came back and forth 3 times a year, see my family here, and just stayed down in Florida. And I went every 5 nights a week. I went to the Grand Floridian Hotel to watch Lynn play the piano.
You're quite an adventurous person.
Oh yes.
No, let's backtrack a little bit. So when you got married, you lived off Cyprus, did you say?
Yes.
What kind of a place was it? Was it a bungalow
It was
house?
a bungalow. We built it. My husband, my father, and Bill's brother was in construction, and my father was a concrete contractor. So my dad gave us the concrete in the house, and his brother paid for a lot of the lumber in it, and I don't know, anyhow we got the house built. And I moved in a nice new home.
Wonderful, wonderful. Like, how big was the house? Could you give us maybe just a brief description?
Well,
how many bedrooms did it have?
It was 2 bedrooms and a bath, and the living room and dining room and kitchen. And the kitchen was big. I'm not one of these ones for these little tiny kitchens. I had a big kitchen, and it had a full basement under it. And I know we lived there a year, and then we built a garage outside because we had to park out in the snow, and that was the year we had 17 inches of snow one night, and Bill had to dig the car out from under it.
And so you had a brand new house.
A brand new
But you didn't have a phone.
Didn't have a phone. No. Not everybody had a phone back then.
Is that right? I think that's interesting.
That's in 1941. Well, in fact, where my folks lived, you couldn't get a plain line phone. You could get the neighborhood phone, and then my dad had went in business for himself, and he would get so mad when he'd come home at noon and want to call a material company, and he'd get on, and there'd be some gal gabbing on, as he
Didn't
said.
they call that a party line, I think?
Party lines,
Yeah.
yes. Everybody had party lines because there wasn't enough phones for everybody, I guess.
You know, I just wanted to make a point of that because a young person watching this might be pretty well appalled because now young people as young as maybe 10 have their own phone.
Well, I think that's what's wrong with the world today, I'll be honest with you. Even driving in a car, just like now, Alan and I made the countryside over. He drove so many places I didn't know where I was at half the time. But when you're driving down the road and you watch the other cars, usually the woman is worse than the men. They're talking on a cell phone while they're driving. I don't think they should be allowed to do that.
Well, you know, that just kind of, I think, points up the difference between when you were first married and now in 2016. That one point about telephones. My dad also had his own business, and he'd get so mad when I was talking to my friends you know, and then he'd have customers say to
Yeah.
him, they couldn't get through because the line was busy, you know, no call waiting at that
No,
time.
no.
So lead us up, how long did you live on, was the street, you lived on Cypress?
Cypress
How
Road.
long did you live there in that house?
Well, the
Approximately.
airport bought it from us.
Oh,
Now, when we built on Cypress Road, there was a field, in fact, Henry Pfister, folks owned the ground across the street from us, and they lived there across it. And I don't know, all I know is we was a mile to the airport. And now you look at, and they talk about Coldwater Creek.
yes.
It was running right past us down there. Nobody thought about it being dangerous at all. Some bug got in it now and they think it's got, talking about paying $300 million to buy all them houses. That's stupid. But anyhow, that's my, I belong out of this world. Get me out
So
of it.
the airport actually bought your house then on
Yeah.
Natural Bridge for what,
Oh, yes.
expansion?
Oh, yeah.
And where did you move from there?
Out on Gist Road in Bridgeton.
Were you by Kathleen Toscher's house on
Yes, yes, we were, in fact, her sister, Kathleen lived on one, Kathleen and then her father, and then there was a street came up, and the Brannicky family, Ray Brannicky, lived, and then her sister lived, and then there was a lady, I can't think what her name was, and then we bought 3 acres out there, that's
Wow.
where I raised my Shetland pony. I had 50 Shetland ponies at one
Shetland ponies, how did you get interested in that?
Well, I had boys and they had to have a pony. My goodness, my father was a horseman. My father raised quarter horses. And he always kept a quarter horse. And his stories of his horse days, I could tell you in an hour of that too. He had a horse that was so well trained that when my dad took his girlfriends out in the horse and buggy, which they did in his day, he would take her out and take her to the dance in town, take her home. And when she got settled, he'd get in his little buggy and he'd say, Dan, take me home by the time I go to bed. And the horse would take him all the way 2 miles, the other side of town, home, and Bill would wake up sitting in his front yard. The horse could that well trained. And he showed his cutting horses almost to the day he died with Augie Bush. Augie Bush would bring his horses and cattle and all out from down there on Bush Farm out to Wentzville where my dad lived. And that's where they lived. Oh, yeah.
How about that? Now, where did your boys go to school?
Pattonville.
Did they? You were inside the Pattonville line
We
there?
were in the Pattonville district.
And all three of them graduated from Pattonville?
Yes.
What did you think about the high school, the Pattonville High School at that point? Were you pretty happy with
Oh,
their
yes. I was happy
education?
with us. Yeah.
And did they work part-time growing up as teenage boys? Did they get jobs?
Well, yes. The 2 oldest boys worked for Larry Ritter, who was a truck farmer from down there in the Bottoms in the Bridgeton area.
What did they do for him?
Worked on anything in that field. Eventually, Mark, the oldest one, when he got old enough to drive, he delivered things to market for him. But they would ride their bicycles from our house on Gist Road down that real steep hill and get down in the bottom and work for him and come home and drive that bicycle. I don't know how they got the bicycles up down the hill, but that's their business.
Did your boys go on to college?
No. They, no, they didn't. Dale went to work for the bank when he was a junior in high school. And one of the gentlemen that he worked with there wanted him to go on to school, and Dale didn't want to. Well, then he wound up getting married so quick and had 2 children, and oh, that's another part of life. Honey, you could keep me all day if you want me to go on.
Well, it's fascinating listening to
And,
your stories, and I mean, I just
now Mark, he graduated from the trade school, St. Louis County Trade School. He went to Pattonville High School, and in his junior year, the teacher there suggested that he wanted to go into engineering, drawing blueprints for stuff. And so he suggested he go to the trade school. So Mark went to the trade school, and when he graduated from that, he hunted for a job in that, and he got a part-time one, and then it was a connected with some foreign government. Anyway, it folded real quick. And so he came to work at Chelter's hardware store
Oh,
with
really?
me for about 2 years. And Kathleen said to him, Mark, why don't you go to the junior college and up yourself? So he did go to the junior college in Florissant for 2 years, I guess, and then he got a real good job at Emerson Electric. And I laughed about that because the younger boy, Alan, went up to the unemployment office in St. Anne's and they took it some kind to fill out and turn back in, and they was going to help him find a job. Well, they did. But anyway, he said to Mark, you ought to go get you one of them tickets and fill it out. And Mark said, bring me one when you go up there next time. So Alan brings him one, and he fills it out, and he takes it back up there on a Tuesday. By Friday, they had a job for him at Emerson Electric.
Wow,
When he got to Emerson Electric, he found his boss over there was the guy that had taught him at the trade school.
Oh, so you think he remembered the name, or he saw the name?
I don't know. All I know is Mark got a job over there, and he's worked for him for 35 years
Oh
now.
my goodness. And can you tell us where Emerson Electric is? Just for the sake of maybe people don't know?
Goodness, I forget. It's off of Lucas and Hunt Road.
And Florissant Avenue.
And Florissant Avenue, yeah. It's over in that area. And yeah, he's still working there today, I guess. And,
Do any of your three boys live in this area now, presently?
Well, no, not in Bridgeton. No.
But in St. Louis?
No, Alan lives down in South St. Louis where I live by him. Dale lives at Wright City.
Okay.
Now him and his first wife separated, and they had 2 children. And when she decided she was going to leave him, she made arrangements to take the daughter with her. And she kept telling Dale that she was going to be here. But it turned out my sister's daughter went to school with her daughter, and she come home and said, Libby's going to live in California with her mother. So I said to Dale, have you heard that rumor? And he said no. Well, he checked it. As it turned out, she moved out there for 6 months. Wasn't long and she came back here. And I had the 2 kids back here for a while. But in the meantime, Dale remarried. And the girl married, and she lives in California now. Her husband works for Paramount Studios in Hollywood. And the boy came back. He was in California going to school out there, and we thought everything was going along pretty good. And I got a phone call from him.
This is your grandson?
Yeah.
Yes.
Grandma, can I come live with you? And I said, well, Greg, what's going on? Well, I want to come back to Missouri, and I want to live by my daddy, but I don't like that woman he's married to now, so I don't want to live with him. But I want to come back to my home base. Can I come live with you? Well, this was like 3 months after my husband had died, and I was living in a mobile home at that time. And I had a bedroom and a bath at the other end that I didn't use, and I said, I got an empty bedroom and a bathroom. If you want to come anytime you want. Well, I'll see you, he said. So the next day, Dale calls me, the son that's up in Wright City, and says, Mom, I'm going to come up tomorrow. I'm going to be cutting wood all day, and you're always such good help with stacking that wood up. So I went up there and worked with him. While I was up there, I said to him, have you heard from Greg lately? And he said, oh yeah, he calls me once a week. He's wanting me to ask you if he can live with you. And I said, well, he finally got around to calling me and asking me himself, and I told him he could. I said, do you have any idea when he'll come? He said, no, but I know he's anxious to get out of California. So, okay, I figured Greg will be coming one of these days, and I go home that Sunday night at 10 o'clock, somebody's beating on my front door. And it was Greg.
Oh, boy.
I think he must have gotten his car on Friday and drove straight through.
Right.
He had everything he owned piled in that car. None of it had been packed in a bag or box. It was just well, we unloaded it, and thank God the bedroom was empty, and I turned him in that bedroom. The next morning, he got up about 10 o'clock, and he said, Grandma, I got to go find me a job. And I said, well, I guess you have to go. I don't even know what you're qualified to do anymore. You've been away from me so long. He left at 10 o'clock, and 2 o'clock in the afternoon he came back. He had a manager's job with the Bank of St. I can't think of the name of the bank now. It was in St. Peter's. Bank of Missouri. No, it isn't St. Louis Bank. Anyway, he had a job with a bank.
Boy, that was pretty fast.
Yes, it was, and he worked over the years, he worked 3 or 4 different banks and they kept, and I don't know, it just, I don't know, that's part of life.
Well, you've had quite a few, sounds like moves.
Well,
You told us you,
I moved, well, let's see, when
after you lived on Gist, where did you go from there?
Just, that's when we went down into the Carrollton subdivision for about 2 years.
And why did you move from Gist? Was it a bigger house or?
Well, yeah, Gist was a big house and all that ground and all them ponies and everything we raised, and my husband couldn't take care of none of it, and I couldn't either, so we went down and bought a house in the Carrollton subdivision, and Bill took care of the yard there, because it was a corner house, and everybody said that came around our house on that corner, it was like a park, because he kept his garden and all, he was a gardener all his life. And I guess when he died was when I went, no, it was, he got worse, and he couldn't work, and he couldn't do anything in the yard or anything, and we sold that, and we bought a mobile home in St. Peter's.
Oh, where was that?
Can't remember the address on it right now.
Was it off Mexico Road?
Yeah. It was out that way.
Was it El Dorado Mobile Home Court?
Yeah.
My
that's
mom
it.
and dad lived there.
Yeah, that's where we lived, and that's where we lived when Bill died. And I stayed there until I went to Florida, I guess. Yeah, because Greg, in the meantime, bought he wanted to buy my trailer when I was gonna move, and he bought my trailer, and then I loaded up and went to Florida.
And why did you come back from Florida, may I ask?
Because my boys want me back in Missouri.
Blood is thicker than water.
I was down there for 12 years.
Oh, wow.
And I came home at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. But the only boy that came down to see me while I was down there was Alan, the younger one. And it was because his wife's father lived at Avon Park, which was only 20 miles from me. So what they did, they would come down, usually they flew in, and either I met them at the airport and kept them a couple days, and then they went to her dad's, and then they flew home, or vice versa. And that's why he comes, but the other 2 never took time to come down there and see me at all. And so when they called me, and they was anxious for me just to come back up here and stay. What the world do you want to stay down there for? Well, my friend down there had gotten sick, and so we parted our friendship, and I came back up to Missouri.
And
When I come up here, they want to know where I was going to live, and I said, not with any one of you. And they looked at me, and the one lived in Wright City. He thought sure I was going to go up there and live with them. They got a big house with an extra bedroom and a bath and the whole bit. And I said, no, you're 50 miles out of St. Louis, and I don't want to live that far out of town. Both of you be going back to work, and here I'll be out here on this farm all by myself. No, that's not me. Then Mark lives in a mobile home in St. Charles. That's the oldest one. He's 65, never married. I said, I know what I'll do. I'll live in your basement, Mark. And he didn't catch it for a minute, and then he did it. He said, oh, Mom, it's too dirty down there.
that's cute. That's cute.
And I said, well, I guess I'll let Alan find me an apartment. I said to Mark, how about finding me an apartment in St. Charles? I don't know how to hunt for an apartment, Mom. And I said, forget it. Alan, you find me an apartment down there by you. So he did. So I moved to South St. Louis, and I might as well have moved to Timbuktu. I didn't know nothing about South St. Louis. I was born and raised by the airport, and I knew North St. Louis right and left. I didn't know enough about South. All I knew is they had nice, cute names on their streets. Cherokee and Chippewa and all that. But my dad worked down there when I was a kid, and when he'd come home from work and talk about living on them streets, that just fascinated me to no end. Well, now I know where they're at. It took me 2 years to find out where they're all at, but I live down there now.
So do you live in the city down there?
Yes, I live in an apartment complex.
Okay.
I got a 1-bedroom apartment
All right.
in the apartment complex.
What do you think of Bridgeton now when you do come in this way, and we are, in Bridgeton this morning at the Banker Hill Farm? What do you think of Bridgeton? Surely you look around and kind of think St. Charles Rock Road, the businesses, so many have changed.
Oh, yeah. In fact, the last time I came into Bridgeton for any particular reason was when Kathleen Telcher died. I went to see Bob and Evan Marshall, and they told me that she had died, and she was laid out at Collier's Funeral Home, and I knew where it was at. So anyway, I came out here, but oh, I had a terrible time finding my way around. St. Charles Rock Road was the biggest mess I ever hit in my life. I had to drive miles and miles before I found parts of it that looked halfway familiar, you know. Well, anyway, I finally found the funeral home.
Are you still driving?
Oh, yes. If they take my car away from me, they're gonna put me 6 foot under. I warned them about that a long time ago. You take my car away from me and you might as well set me 6 foot under.
Have you seen what the area of Northwest Plaza is now? You had mentioned
Oh, it's
Northwest
a
Plaza
mess.
earlier
Well,
in our
Bridgeton don't
meeting.
even look like itself anymore. Bridgeton don't even look like itself anymore. The airport had just taken over everything.
Is that sad for you? When you-
Yes, it was, especially when they took it all and they're not using half of it. I mean, there's big amounts of it they bought, and it's fenced in, and it's private property of the airport, and they don't even have a runway on it. They don't even got a storage building. They got nothing. They just took it away from them.
What about your property on Gist Road? What's going on with that right now? Have you seen it? Do you know?
No, I haven't been down this road for years. I don't know what's.
What about the house on the corner of Bonfils? Anything? Do you know?
Well, that's half of that subdivision they done away with. People moved out and they just simply done away with it.
Mhm. Were your boys growing up? You said at the house on Gist then?
Yes, that's basically where they grew up.
Well, it was good that you were able to live there and have that room, and
Oh,
as
yeah.
you said, you had
Oh,
the
yeah.
ponies for them. That was a good time for
Oh, yeah.
them, wasn't it?
It was a good time, yeah.
So your memories of Bridgeton are pretty good.
Oh, yeah, I don't have no trouble with it. I just think it's too bad that the airport had to take over and rule everything. And I guess we should have known that was gonna happen years ago.
I thank you for sitting and talking with us today. We have learned, and it's a pleasure to listen and hear your stories.
Yeah.
And I hope you continue to enjoy your life.
Oh, I will.
Thank you.
There's no reason not.